If you have a hard time with boundaries, how might your life be different if you could say no as easily as a joyful yes? I'm Love Coach Mariya, and for over a decade now, I've been encouraging folks to empower their compassion so it's big enough for ourselves as well as others, and so our boundaries can become healthier than ever. You're listening to Empower Your Compassion, and on this show, we'll be unlocking transformative insights to help you reconnect to your true yes, so you can say no from that more expansive energy and get more of what you want in your relationships and your life without sacrificing your compassion. Are you ready for more love? Let's grow. Hello, my friends. I am very delighted to introduce to you my new friend, Sawey. He's an artist, a poet, a wilderness guide, and a director of a nonprofit called Men's Alaska Project, providing wilderness rites of passage for boys and teens in the Alaska wild. And we are actually working on a bit of a collaboration together. We want to provide in-person experiences for people to learn and practice healthy boundaries, and it's still very much in the works, but I'm delighted to have connected with him and to be exploring a collaboration. So today what we're going to do is talk about our very aligned perspectives on boundaries and sort of a bit about how they can often show up a little bit different for men and women, and also just in different circumstances. And most importantly, some clarification about what boundaries are and what they're not and how they can actually serve us in our relationships. So let's get into it. Chris, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Really looking forward to our conversation. We share a lot of perspectives on boundaries, and I'm really excited about getting into the differences between parts of life and relating that get really confused and conflated a lot when it comes to boundaries, when it comes to needs, when it comes to making requests, when it comes to establishing rules and all of that jazz.
Yeah.
So let's just start by saying what comes up for you when we talk about making requests.
Yeah, making requests. Well, first off, thank you for having me on the show, and I'm really excited to be here. I've really enjoyed all of our conversations leading up to this moment, and just as a disclaimer, I'm not feeling 100%.
I appreciate you showing up anyway.
Yeah, but to answer your question about requests, you know, it took me a long time for me to learn how to ask for what I need.
Mm,
And as I examine my own heart and how I want to show up for others, I realize just how willing I am and how far I'll go out of the way to meet someone's clear request.
mm,
And it took me a minute to believe in the idea that A, I could have my own and it would be met at that same level of desire to meet. And I had to also learn the hard way when those requests were either dismissed or blown past, the need to set up really strong boundaries, which took me a very long time to really get and understand. And so I think requests are a really important piece to where I think this conversation is going. I love that you started there.
mm. Awesome. I was someone who grew up very much encouraged to ask for things.
Mhm.
I was often told you can't hear yes unless you ask. So I was very happy to make requests for things all the time. I had one friend in my later teen years who actually found it kind of offensive that I would so brazenly ask
Mhm.
for things.
Mhm.
And she said something to the effect of, it's kind of rude to ask people and like put them in the position, like maybe they're not comfortable saying no. Being a people pleaser, hardcore, not even knowing that I was a people pleaser at the time, I immediately was like, oh no, now I have to like be more conscientious and careful
Mhm.
and caretake, for other people and consider, asking for things if it might put them in an uncomfortable position. flash forward years later, and I was like, that is not my responsibility.
Totally. Yeah.
It's like if they're uncomfortable saying no, that's kind of on them. But I think part of the reason like bought into that story when she presented it was that I think I kind of realized that I wasn't always comfortable saying no when needed. And then I was like, oh, shoot, yeah, I guess I'm putting people in that similar situation. But it was when I started realizing that I needed to learn how to say no a little bit better, and that that was my responsibility, and that therefore it wasn't my responsibility to like put a governor on my requests.
Right. Yeah. That's a powerful shift to be able to go, wait a second, that's not mine. That has nothing to do with me. That's none of my business. Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
powerful shift.
And I think that it also, another like shift within that that was really empowering was learning that, and this came also from learning about nonviolent communication and ways, like healthier ways to make requests that, especially when it's in a more intimate relationship and there's a bit more vulnerability and, it's scary and your soft spots are exposed.
Right.
Um, and so in NVC, for those who aren't super familiar with it, the general formula is to state the facts of the situation, you like share how you're feeling, and making sure to be intentional about using emotion words, not I
Right.
feel like you're ignoring me, but like I feel sad. And then state the needs that go along with that. I'm feeling sad because, this behavior isn't really meeting my needs for, feeling loved or seen or connected.
Mhm.
And then you could make a request like, hey, would you be willing to put the phone down when we're talking?
Yeah.
And the thing that was really important, one of the big takeaways for me in learning about making requests in that way was that you, and I don't want to like should on anyone, but like you ought not make the request a demand. And what was really spelled out in NVC was that really the only difference between a request and a demand is your expectations. It's not about how you state the question, it's about how open you are to a no. Because if it's a demand, you're really only open to a yes. But if it's truly a request, then it's the
Mm.
start of a conversation. It's like, hey, this was all preamble. The observation, feelings, needs, and request is all just opening for like a negotiation. Like, what is also
Mhm.
going to help get your needs met in this situation? Let's strategize and collaborate to find a way where both of our needs can get met. And I'm like the initial request is just a suggestion. Like, here's a way that would
Sure.
help get my needs met. Does that align with your needs as well?
Sure. Yeah, that nonviolent communication, a framework that I often use is facts, feelings, needs, request, especially in
Mhm.
repair. Um, and the facts is speaking of what happened, and especially when we can avoid words like you, because especially for me personally, when I hear that word you,
Mhm.
I can have a propensity to get defensive,
Mhm.
especially when there is feelings that are being proposed as facts. You did this. It's like, well, did I? And so starting with the facts, getting clear on what happened, how those what happened made me feel, speaking from the I statement of moving forward, I need, or what would be helpful for me is, and then if I can request anything of you, that's when we bring in the you language. That's when we say, hey, to go where we're going, or for me to feel comfortable, or for me to XYZ, whatever it is, may I ask of you? And it's like the first time that, I feel like we can adequately use the word you. I think 100% responsibility goes a long way uh,
Mhm.
in communicating with another human, right? It goes a
Absolutely.
long way. Yeah.
In fact, I feel like the three core pillars of nonviolent communication are personal responsibility, empathy, and non-judgment. And yeah, that personal responsibility part is really, really crucial. I will say though, just as a slight caveat, I think that it can be okay to use you in the facts part. And
Yeah.
that I think it's maybe a little bit more important when you're talking about the feelings part, not to use you, because oftentimes what people will say is, I feel like you. I feel like you're ignoring me. I feel like you don't care.
Right.
Um,
Right.
but in the facts part, if it says,
You walked in.
right,
You walked
right,
in the
yeah,
door.
like it's generally going to be part of it for
Yeah,
sure.
that's fair. That's fair.
And my favorite sentence stem for the request actually is, would you be willing?
Yeah, it's a great one. Would you be willing?
Yeah.
Just in general, I think learning this kind of communication is so helpful in order to be able to not fight, to not have as much conflict.
Mhm. So there's this tricky thing that you and I've talked a bit about before as well in terms of rules and
Ooh,
how a lot of people think that they're stating a boundary when what they're really doing is stating a rule.
right,
And this falls right in line with demands because, at least in my mind, I feel like rules and demands are very similar and it's a similar energy, I guess. Maybe that's what I'm noticing. But um, just to be clear for my listeners, boundaries are not weapons of disconnection. They're not tools for control, and they're absolutely not anyone else's responsibility. I think that the best way to think of them is as your resource limits. And, things like our time, energy, and attention are finite resources. And that's what makes them really precious, like diamonds and gold. And that's also what makes them our responsibility to manage. So when you're communicating about a boundary, you're just giving a gift of information about what you're going to do for you.
right,
That being said, we do have needs that involve other people. We're social creatures. Um, and so when there's something that you actually need someone else to do, then that's where the request comes into play. Nowhere does a demand need to come into place. And stating your boundary as a rule that's just trying to control someone else's behavior is really just going to backfire.
right. Yeah, this is such rich territory because I think we all have a different relationship with rules, and I think
Mm.
for some people, rules make us feel safe. For other people, they feel constricting, and I'm one of those people. In fact, it's what led me to write a book on this because um, rules don't work for me. Rules often tell me what not to do, and a boundary will tell me what I can do and what's safe to work within. And so I
Mhm.
grew up with a lot of rules. I grew up with a lot, and rules were used as authority, but of power. And as a young boy, and I know this is true not just for me, but for a lot of young men, is we are trying to figure out where we belong in the world. We're trying to figure out what is real authority versus what is fake authority, and it's
Mm.
assumed over us a lot of the times. But if we ever get that feeling of constriction or suffocation, and I can only assume this might be also true for women, but I can only speak for my experience and what I've talked to with the men that I work with. But this idea that there's this constriction that's happening, and we want to create clear lines and draw lines that says this is where you stop and this is where I begin.
Mhm.
And needing that definitive line is is where we find safety. And when
Mhm.
it's clean and when it's clear and everybody's in agreement, that's when we can truly find what we're looking for, which ultimately is safety and then connection. You have a great piece on what boundaries are and what boundaries not. And I love your gate. I've heard you talk about this. What do you say?
I think that most people's boundaries tend to show up as flimsy fences or spiked walls, and that healthy boundaries look more like what I call selective gates.
Yeah.
Hey friends, real quick, in case you're busy, which you probably are if you have a hard time with boundaries, I just wanted to make sure you know that you can go to boundariesthatfeelgood.com and download a free resource for making boundaries easier without sacrificing your compassion. Again, that's boundariesthatfeelgood.com. Okay, let's get back to the show. There's a few different lenses you can view boundaries through. that, well, there's a lot actually, and a lot of them I would boldly venture to say are incorrect. And some of them are true and yet just very different lenses. And one of those that I like that isn't quite my Gates perspective that I'll elaborate on in a moment, but along the lines of what you were just saying, some people like to view boundaries as points of connection, like our skin. Like our skin is our interface with the world. It's, these are the points that we connect at. Like without them, like the boundaries are what define, to your point, what's me and what's you and what's mine and what's yours.
Right.
Um, and this is how we connect through our boundaries. But
Hmm.
I find it more like practical to think of them as our resource limits, and the way that they show up, flimsy fences is where we say yes too often, where we're basically over giving beyond our capacity. Or there's spiked walls where we say no too harshly. We get a little too like overly protective of our limits, and it's a protective defense mechanism to get kind of spiky about telling people to fuck off instead of just no thanks.
Sure.
Um, and so selective gates is like this middle way alternative energy and way of being where you're effectively drawing your boundaries around behaviors instead of people, and essentially giving them the keys to accessing you through the gates that you've installed. So that's where you can establish those those boundaries that define what you can do. Like I'm not available for this, but I am available for this. You can come through, you can access me this way. These are the types of behaviors that I'm open to.
Hmm. Yeah, a lot of people think that boundaries are about keeping everybody else out, but really they're there to keep us safe, right? I mean, yes, but yes, and right, but more importantly, they are established so that we have a sense of safety for us. And so that's why it comes down to when we're talking about this, we speak in what I will do. As in this, I'll say this, I really didn't fully grasp the concept of boundaries until I owned land myself. It wasn't until a property assessor showed up on my land and was like taking pictures of my property with no permission whatsoever. And I walked outside and I was like, who are you? Like, I, I had thought, like, dude, I thought a no trespassing sign was a boundary. And going back to the no thing, that's not a boundary, that's a rule.
Mm.
No is telling you what you can't do. It's a rule, not a boundary. And so I had this no trespassing sign up, and he showed up and he's taking pictures, and the man he says, "No, I'm allowed to do this, right? Like we have permission by the state to walk on your property whenever we want." And I felt this need to be like, to be clear, friend, I have not given you permission. You need to step back, right? And it created this tension between him and I lived with, like, it really fired me up. And this was one of the main reasons that it propelled me into looking into boundaries for myself, um, because I wanted to define once and for all, like, what's within my power and what's
Hmm.
within somebody else's,
Hmm.
you know. And saying, like, Anne Lamott has a quote. It's like, "No is a complete sentence." While I love that, it really is, it really is incomplete, because no, no is one of those things that, again, it's just telling you what not to do, but it's not really defining like what an actual boundary is, right? Does that make sense?
Yep, absolutely. My favorite way to communicate a boundary is to follow a no with a yes. So basically, I'm not available for that, but I am available for this.
Right,
And I
right.
think that I'm I'm realizing just now that I think it's also really worth stating what I think we sometimes take for granted, but again, with boundaries being the point of connection where I end and where you begin, like all of this, it's inherently relational. Like you don't need a boundary if you are literally on an island all by yourself. You only need boundaries when it comes to interacting with other people.
Right.
And because of that, there it's messy. Interacting with other people is always going to be messy, and it's always going to require some form of negotiation. And, you know, one of the simplest boundaries is, hey, I'm not available for being yelled at. Um, Therefore, I'm going to walk away. So, on a quick side note, I would say an incorrect or ineffective boundary is stop yelling at me. That's a boundary. Well, no, you're just trying to control them.
Control. Yeah.
If it's a
Right.
boundary, leave. But my point about that is sometimes you can't. Sometimes, like for example, you're on your land and someone has come onto it. You can't just leave. They need to leave. Like there are
Right.
points when in order to like honor your boundaries, someone else does need to do something. Sometimes that
Right.
does happen. I like to think about boundaries as what we need to do for us. And sometimes it does need to be a negotiation with someone else. And you can't just say no. Like no isn't, to your point, it may be a complete sentence, but it's not a complete boundary.
Right. Right. And because no lacks information, right? It doesn't really encompass uh, really anything. It just tells you you can't do something, and that's what is beautiful about boundaries because it tells you. One of the things that I say is a boundary is limit plus condition. It defines a limit and it tells you what happens if that limit is crossed, right? And one of the things I also say is we've heard of TLC, tender loving care. A way to give TLC is through ELC, and it's just a way to remember my formula for creating a boundary, which is expression plus
Mhm.
limit plus condition. And it's
Nice.
it's these three things that come in tandem that really establish clean, concise, clear lines in the sand for where you begin and somebody else ends. And I think we all can stand to learn and to use these things a little bit cleaner.
Absolutely. In fact, I have a related sort of formula that I like to use, particularly in more intimate relationships. It's not necessarily worth your time and energy with, a stranger on the bus, for example, but it's my shorthand for it is like the XYZ formula. And so the example is when X happens, I feel Y. And so to care for myself, I will do Z. And,
Yeah, simple.
for example, that I used previously, like when voices are raised, or my favorite one, because it's my least favorite one, when I receive harsh criticism, I feel shame. And so to care for myself in those instances, I'll step away from the conversation. And
Hmm.
so somewhere
Hmm.
within there, obviously, there's the expression. I'm clarifying what the limits are. The limits are raised voices or harsh criticism. And the consequence is the Z, like what I'm going to do. I'm going to walk away. And it's not a punishment either.
Right.
Like getting back into that energy, like the demand energy or the rule energy, the
Right.
controlling, or that punishing energy, like, oh, well, you did the thing, so I'm going to do something to hurt you. It's like, no, I'm
Yeah.
walking away because I am not going to
Right.
sit here and be in shame. Um, and then on a side note too, though, in terms of self-care, which I will also say over and over again, self-care is relational care. But the really, really important piece of that is that you have to follow through on your Z every time.
Totally.
So the next time
Right.
there's raised voices or harsh criticism, you
Right.
got to walk away for
Right.
you and for the relationship. Because on the relationship side, if you don't do it, you're devaluing your word. It's like,
Yeah.
and then because you're devaluing your word, you're also eroding any sort of trust. If you say something and then follow through on it consistently, even if the other person doesn't really like the thing, you are at least proving to be reliable and consistent, and that does build some level of trust. And
Trust.
then on the
Yeah.
self side, that's also how you build self-trust. If you say to yourself, to someone else, to the world that this is self-care for you, and then you don't do it, like you're eroding any sort of
Right.
self-trust. Whereas if you do follow through on it,
Right.
that's how you build up self-trust.
Yeah. As I listen to you, usually when I set a firm boundary, it's like mine comes with a little bit more spice, right? Like mine's like I will not be talked to this way. I'm setting a limit. Like I will not in my, not in my house, not in my whatever. Maybe that's my upbringing.
But
Stop
also
managing that.
depends on the relationship and the context.
Yeah, yeah,
And, getting back to rules though, when you say I will not be spoken to this way, what do you do? Do you stand there and wait for them to stop talking to you that way, or do you end the conversation? Do you walk
No,
away? Do
well,
you
it's
hang
you.
up the
You
phone?
define. You find it's limit plus condition. So you can't. You don't just say what the limit is. You tell them what will happen if that. I will not stand yelling in this house. Okay, whatever. If you continue to yell, you are welcome to. I'm not telling you what you can and can't not do. You can absolutely yell, but I'm not going to be here for it. Or if it's, let's say it's happening in the house, if you continue to yell, I am going to ask you to leave. And it's really just speaking from I statements. And if you can do it in a way that's relational, as you're saying, because that's what it is, it's about navigating relational dynamics. You're just saying, I will not be spoken to this way. I'm not gonna this. I will not tolerate this. And so you can say like, I need the conversation to stay between here and here. Okay. Once it goes here, I'm going to have to make a choice, and that choice is I'm going to ask you to leave.
Mhm.
And you know, once you get past that, that's a whole different conversation. And if they won't leave, then I will be forced to, and that's where it gets tricky. We're
Mhm.
going to start talking about authority at this point, like what's real authority, what's his given away authority. That's a whole conversation around what I work with boys and all of that. So we won't go there, but uh, yeah,
It gets tricky, and I really appreciate your formula of limits plus conditions because I think a lot of people get really frustrated, especially a lot of the clients that come to me. They're like, I'm trying to express my boundaries, but people aren't respecting them. And then I'm like, this is where the disconnect happens, is they think that all they need to do is say, I will not be spoken to this way. And then that's it. They stated their
that's it.
boundary, and the other person, it's like the other person's job to respect it. And it's like,
Right.
you have two options. You can either claim responsibility for that boundary and do whatever you need to do for you, or if you really need them to do something different, you can get into a more collaborative conversation about, making a request. And
Right.
if you can't just leave, or maybe would rather make it a more engaging type of dynamic, then say, like, hey, this is what's happening. This is how I'm feeling. How are you feeling right now? What are you
Yeah.
needing? Okay,
Yeah.
well, this is what I'm needing. How can
Totally.
we collaborate and like do something different here so that both of our needs can get met?
Right. Yeah, and so like a boundary isn't one of the first steps. A boundary is like almost like a last resort. Like you should be able to have these kind of conversations and like asking more curiosity questions and asking like what do you need right now in this moment? Hey, is it cool? Can I ask you to like lower your voice right now? I'm just feeling a bit stressed. My nervous system is a bit reactive right now. If it's cool, would you be willing, as you say, would you be willing to lower your tone so that I may continue to engage with you? Okay, now you continue to raise your voice. Okay, I need to say this for me. Yeah, boundary. Boom.
Yep,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
It's powerful stuff. And if you're open to it, I'm curious what comes up from you when we talk about sort of like lighter boundaries, like you're at work and you've got a lot on your plate and someone comes to you and it's like, oh my gosh, can you help me out with this thing? I'm really desperate.
You talking about like time boundaries?
Sure. And energy maybe.
Yeah. Um, just what I'm available for. Is that what you
Hmm.
mean?
Yeah. I like to think of it as capacity. I think capacity
Yeah.
in a lot of contexts, not maybe all, but in a lot of contexts, capacity is kind of synonymous with boundaries in terms of, my view of it is resource limits, like it's time, energy, attention, or maybe someone invites you to something like your friend is like, hey, you want to come hang out with me and the work crew, and you don't like his work crew.
Sure.
There's lots of
Yeah.
situations where it's it's not that sort of like XYZ limit plus condition type of boundary. It's just like it's just a no, but sometimes it can be hard for some people to access. And I think maybe we talked about this before and that it's something that's not been a challenge for you.
Yeah, I this isn't really where I see these as boundaries, right? It's I don't see them as boundaries. I think that's just communication and letting other people know what I'm available for. That's when no's are enough, right? Hey, you want to go out to work with
No.
me? No, no, I'm good.
One of my
Thank you
favorite
though. Yeah. Well,
One of my favorite memes is Ron Swanson in front of like this really floral wallpaper, and the words just say, "I can't go because I don't want to."
right. Yeah. Hey, I can't go because I don't want to.
Um, but I guess for me, the reason that there's an overlap in the realm of boundaries here is because when I think about boundaries as our resource limits, and in fact, when I think about people who struggle with boundaries, and we often label those people as people pleasers. I consider myself a recovering people pleaser. And we have a hard time seeing what our own limits are, and we'll blow past our limits all the time, and we don't recognize it until we're overextended. Or another thing we'll do is give with some sort of assumption of reciprocity. And then when it doesn't happen, then we get like resentful or we feel used or taken advantage of. And it's like, hey, this was your resource limits are yours. They're your responsibility to manage.
right.
Like if you say yes
Right.
to things beyond your availability or your interest, like that's not the other person's fault that they trusted that your yes was sincere.
Right.
And I think that it internally, it's the same
Right.
failure of personal responsibility that shows up when you get pissed that someone won't stand down because you stated a rule. I will not be talked to this way. And that's all that you say, you know. It's all that same misplaced responsibility and abdicated responsibility.
Right. I hear what you're getting at, and yeah, I think people pleasing for the recovering people pleasers in the world. This is where it gets a little tricky to navigate. For me, what comes up is like an inauthentic yes leads to a resentful no,
Mhm.
and that's the beautiful thing about boundaries is the greatest gift that boundaries can give us is clarity for ourselves. To just
Absolutely.
defining what we will tolerate and what we will not. And if we don't have a clear idea of what that is, then ultimately we're just kind of outsourcing that to other people. And so it totally makes sense when the line isn't drawn because the line can't be drawn if it's not clear. And so I think that's the beauty of this work is it provides clarity for what one will and will not tolerate. And I think being conscious to where energy leaks come from, right? This propensity that we have to often fill other cups before filling ours, or maybe the caretaker role, or feeling like I want to make sure everybody else is fed before I feed myself, therefore giving me the leftovers. And yeah, I mean, this is a whole different conversation, but I think that that's where it starts. And it starts with uncovering what it is that where our energy goes, where it needs to stop, what it costs us. It's a
Hmm.
question that I feel like isn't often asked. Is what is this going to cost me? There's obligatory energy. One of the things that we teach at MAP is we try not to make decisions in a fog state when there's fog, fear, obligation, or guilt. And obligation is a big one, especially for the people pleasers. Like that, whatever that
Absolutely.
is. Yeah. So I mean, it sounds like what you're getting at, right?
Absolutely. Yep. And what did you say again? The inauthentic yes leads to a resentful no.
Correct.
The challenge that I find in a lot of the people I work with is that they don't feel that they're being inauthentic with their yes. That it ties into that caretaker thing.
Okay.
They are like what I call a reflexive yes, like, hey, can you, yeah, sure, what do you need? And they don't have any like healthy habits around checking in with themselves and being like, do I actually have the capacity? Like, let me
Right.
actually first stop and see what it is that they need, check in and see if I actually have the capacity and or interest in it, before responding. And then like the deeper layer too, the reason we tend to be a reflexive yes or do that caretaking, make sure everyone else is fed before we eat, is because we learned that like there's a lot of different scenarios that can come up in your formative years that can teach you that that you're responsible for other people being okay so that you can be safe. And so
Right.
that's where that all comes from. And like the work in healing that and healing into boundaries from that is rooting your security within and learning that you have to be your own source of safety and security. And then that's when you can start putting on the oxygen mask, right? And feeding yourself first so that you can actually show up for the people and projects you care most about. And like, I think a lot of recovering people pleasers have a hard time with the whole boundaries thing because it feels, like, they see someone like you, and this is not to disparage you or anything, but they see someone like you with stronger boundaries who's like, I will not tolerate this. And that's like terrifying to the nervous system of someone who needs other people to be okay so that they can be okay.
Right.
And it takes that particular type of healing to be able to stand firm and say like, I'm not okay with this, and I'm okay if you're not okay with me not being okay with that.
Yeah.
And that's a big thing. And this is why I created the Gates method. Speaking about selective gates, it stands for ground in your body and your values, assess your capacity and your true yes, trust in the other's ability to manage, express your no without disconnecting, and steward your precious resources on an ongoing basis, following through, being consistent.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, it's a beautiful framework that you have,
Oh,
and
thanks.
I think a lot of people can be served by it, and it's an interesting thing of that resentment, which you speak to, is like what a sneaky little thing resentment is, because if we one of the ways that I define resentment, and this is a whole different conversation, but resentment is the judgment aimed outward to avoid responsibility inward.
Mhm.
And so at the end of the day, resentment happens when either a boundary hasn't been spoken, a truth hasn't been claimed, or responsibility that's being avoided. And that's when it gets really, really hard. And usually resentment comes through judgments. And one of the things I also say is that judgments is an internal confession, right? It's when we can't take back to the responsibility piece. We have to be able to take 100% responsibility for us. And when we can't do that, our ego does this thing where it wants to point the finger at everybody else for the reason why.
Mm,
This is the reason why I can't be safe because you. And
mm.
that's where that's where it gets really tricky. And so it comes down to self-awareness and really, and this isn't taught. That's the crazy thing. That's what I love about what you're creating is this stuff isn't taught. We weren't taught as a kid. We're not really taught this as adults. It's not like we had boundaries 101 in college. Like this is something that I guess we thought our parents would be able to teach us. But we can only we can't be what we can't see. That's one of the things. We can't just have behavior unless it was modeled. And I think we're in a beautiful point in life right now where we get to figure out what's important to us and how to communicate that with the rest of the world, and showing other people how to do it, I think, is a beautiful way. So I think what you
Yeah.
have is incredible.
Thanks. And I love what you have to offer the world as well. And I'm really excited to continue exploring a collaboration together because I think it'll be really cool to bring your perspectives, especially from, the male masculine lens and with
Mm-hmm.
my perspectives and a little bit more of you know, the people pleasing and the fawning, which definitely not exclusive to women, but certainly more prominent among women, and bring these approaches together for like a really holistic education for people who didn't get taught any of this stuff. And in fact, not only didn't get taught, but got modeled like the what not to do.
What not to do. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love this piece around, and I think that's what we're figuring out too, right? Is like, I really do think that, yeah, I'm going to say masculine and feminine versus men and women. Because I think that there's a masculine way of holding structure,
Hmm.
boundaries that create structure, that create safety.
Hmm.
And then there's the feminine that allows like the spaciousness inside. I see defining boundaries for women and men different. And yeah, I wish I could be, I'm very in touch with my feminine side for sure. But I just wish it was possible just to be a woman for like a week. So that
Want to
I could
swap spaces for a
swap
week?
spaces for sure. Because, yeah, it's so nuanced. And the last thing that I want to do is feel I have, or to overstep my bounds uh, in teaching women how to establish boundaries. But one thing I know how to do is teach it for men and for boys. Because, yeah, I think yeah, I can talk about what it's like working with boys.
Yeah. And I mean, similarly, I prefer working with women because I have a vast amount of respect for the modern man's journey through life. And it's not to say, of course, that there's not overlap in, how support can look
Right.
for the man's journey and the woman's journey. But I just, being a woman and having been on this journey, I feel like I can serve women better than men. And I
Right.
know that men need support and women need men to be supported. And there are some women that are supporting men and I commend them, but I'm very happy to see a slowly growing trend of men such as yourself supporting men in learning these healthier ways to be in the world and move through the world and relate to each other and women and other humans. So it's all good things.
Yeah. Oh, great.
Awesome. Well, I feel like we could go in 10 million different directions, but to respect yours and mine and the audience's time, we'll go ahead and wrap this up here. Is there anything that you would like to share? Any way that people can follow you, see what you're doing, learn more about what you do?
Yeah. I'll be honest, I'm not very good at the whole social media thing, and most of my work is just in-person experiences. But I'm working on it. I'm trying to make what I teach a little bit more accessible. I think the best way to connect with me, my nonprofit, misunderstanding.org. I do have an Instagram. It's got, the links there. You can kind of follow what we're about and some of the videos and the different talks that I do. And then personally, I'm a poet, so my tag is the wilderness poet, just my time out in the wilderness and turning life wisdom into poetry and sharing it with the world. So if anything I said resonated or you're wanting to know about what I'm interested in, you can go check me out there, but you're not really going to see much because I do most of my life in the real world. So we're working on that. We'll figure out what that looks like, but that's the best place.
Yeah, awesome. I would like to shift more in that direction myself. So maybe you can take a little of my online and I can take a little of your IRL and we'll find a happy blend.
Yeah, yeah, I think we're all figuring it out. Well, thank you for having me. This is a beautiful conversation, and I know that there's much more, and uh,
Maybe we'll do it again sometime.
maybe we'll do it again. All right. Thanks, Mariya.
Awesome. Thanks. And thank you for tuning in. It was a wonderful conversation. I'm so glad he came despite feeling a little under the weather today. So, again, if you would like to learn more about Chris, you can check out mensalaskaproject.org. You can also find that endeavor on Instagram at Men's Alaska Project, or you can find some of his own personal musings at _wilderness poet. I've linked all of that in the show notes. And if you would like to connect more with me and my support around boundaries and learn more about the Gates method, you got two options. You can go to explorelovingboundaries.com to set up a free call with me, or if that's a little too much too soon, you can also go to boundariesthatfeelgood feelgood.com and download a jam-packed PDF that goes deeper into the Gates method, dispels some common misconceptions that can really sabotage our boundaries, and even includes a few really helpful scripts for navigating some tricky situations in relationships. So be sure to check that out. And while you're here, though, please do like, subscribe, and share this show so we can spread the love. And wherever you're at on your journey, I send you so much love and courage. Namaste.